Crash landing and first contact. The escape pod hurtled through the alien atmosphere, its silver hull glowing red-hot from the friction. Inside, Dr. Ethan Cole gripped the harness tightly, his knuckles white, as the small craft shuddered violently. Warning klaxons blared, filling the cramped interior with their urgent cries. "Come on, come on," Ethan muttered through gritted teeth, frantically working the manual controls. The planet's surface rushed up to meet him, a sea of emerald treetops that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. With a bone-jarring impact, the escape pod plowed through the canopy and slammed into the forest floor. Ethan's head snapped forward, then back against the headrest. Everything went black. When Ethan regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The pod systems had shut down completely. Sunlight filtered through the cracked view screen, dappling the interior with shifting patterns. He fumbled with the harness release, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Status report," he croaked, more out of habit than any expectation of a response. As expected, the pod's AI remained stubbornly silent. Ethan forced the hatch open and stumbled out into the alien forest. The air was thick and humid, filled with unfamiliar scents. Towering trees with iridescent purple bark stretched skyward, their canopies so dense that only fragments of the alien sun peeked through. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Ethan took stock of his situation. The escape pod was a wreck, its hull crumpled and sparking. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, some his own, some from his crewmates who hadn't made it to the pods in time. The memory of the Starship Horizon's destruction sent a fresh wave of grief through him. "Focus, Cole," he muttered, pushing the pain aside. "Assess and survive." Ethan retrieved the emergency kit from the pod and began to take inventory. Water purification tablets, a multi-tool, emergency rations, a portable medikit. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he worked, a sound caught his attention. Something was moving through the underbrush, heading his way. He froze, eyes scanning the dense foliage. Whatever was approaching was big, much bigger than him. Ethan's hand went to his hip, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. He cursed silently, backing up against the escape pod. The forest parted, and Ethan's jaw dropped. A woman stepped into the clearing, but she was unlike any woman he had ever seen. She towered over him, easily 12 feet tall, with skin the color of polished bronze and hair that shimmered like spun silver. Her features were striking, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. She wore clothing made from woven plant fibers, adorned with intricate patterns that hinted at a complex culture. In one massive hand, she held a spear that looked more ceremonial than functional. The giantess's eyes widened as she saw Ethan. She called out in a language he couldn't understand, her voice rich and melodious. More rustling from the forest heralded the arrival of others like her, a small group of equally tall and beautiful women, each unique in their coloring and features. Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms out in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I mean you no harm," he said, knowing they couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. The first woman, clearly the leader, approached cautiously. She crouched down, bringing her face level with Ethan's. Her eyes roamed over him, taking in his alien appearance with obvious fascination. She reached out with one massive hand, hesitating just short of touching him. Ethan held his breath, acutely aware of how easily she could crush him if she chose. Instead, her touch when it came was surprisingly gentle. She ran a finger along his arm, marveling at his smallness. The leader spoke again, this time to her companions. They conferred in their musical language, occasionally glancing at Ethan. He remained still, knowing that his fate hung in the balance of their discussion. Finally, the leader turned back to him. She pointed to herself and said clearly, "Zora." Then she pointed at Ethan, her head tilted in question. Understanding dawned. "Ethan," he replied, tapping his chest. "My name is Ethan." Zora's face broke into a radiant smile. She repeated his name, the sound transformed by her accent into something almost lyrical. Then she gestured to the forest behind her and spoke again, her meaning clear even if the words were incomprehensible. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the ruined escape pod. There was nothing for him there. No way to call for help. No chance of repair. Whatever fate awaited him with these giant women, it had to be better than slowly starving to death in an alien forest. He nodded, gathering up his meager supplies. Zara beamed at him, then gently, so gently, scooped him up in her arms. Ethan's world tilted as she lifted him, cradling him against her chest like a child. As Zara carried him into the forest, Ethan's mind raced. Who were these women? Where had they come from? And most importantly, what did they want with him? The trees seemed to part before them as they moved deeper into the alien wilderness. Ethan caught glimpses of strange creatures flitting through the undergrowth and heard calls that sent shivers down his spine. But cradled in Zara's arms, he felt an odd sense of security. After what felt like hours of travel, the forest began to thin. Ethan gasped as they emerged into a vast clearing. Before them stood a village unlike anything he had ever seen. Massive structures rose into the sky, crafted from the purple wood of the forest giants. Intricate carvings adorned every surface, telling stories he couldn't begin to decipher. But it was the inhabitants that truly took his breath away. Hundreds of women, all as tall and beautiful as his rescuers, went about their daily lives. Some tended to gardens filled with enormous alien fruits. Others worked at looms, weaving fabrics of impossible colors. Children, all girls, Ethan noticed, played in the central square, their laughter echoing across the clearing. As Zara carried him into the village, all activity ceased. Every eye turned to stare at the tiny stranger in their leader's arms. Ethan felt a moment of panic at being the center of so much attention, but Zara's grip remained reassuringly gentle. She brought him to the largest structure in the village, clearly some sort of meeting hall. Inside, a group of older women waited, their faces etched with lines of wisdom and worry. Zara set Ethan down carefully, then addressed the council in their flowing language. Ethan stood tall, acutely aware of his small stature among these giants. He met the elders' gazes squarely, refusing to be intimidated. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the courage and determination that had seen him through years of space exploration. As the council conferred, Ethan's scientific mind began to race. The implications of this society were staggering. An entire civilization of giantesses with no men in sight. How had they evolved? How did they reproduce? And most pressingly, why did they seem so fascinated by him? Little did Ethan know, the answers to these questions would shake the very foundations of his understanding of life in the universe, and thrust him into a role he could never have imagined. Cultural exchange and growing trust. Days turned into weeks as Ethan acclimated to life among the giant women. The village, he learned, was called Aethoria, and its inhabitants referred to themselves as the Aethorians. Zara, as he had surmised, was indeed their leader, a position she had earned through a combination of wisdom, strength, and compassion. Communication was a constant challenge, but Ethan's background in xenolinguistics served him well. He threw himself into learning their language, while simultaneously teaching them English. It was a slow process, filled with misunderstandings and moments of unexpected hilarity, but gradually, bridges of understanding began to form. Ethan's days fell into a routine of sorts. Mornings were spent with Zara and the village elders, exchanging knowledge about their respective cultures and technologies. The Aethorians were fascinated by his tales of space travel and the diversity of the galaxy. In turn, they shared the rich tapestry of their own history and traditions. Our people have lived in harmony with this world for countless generations, Zara explained one day, her command of English improving rapidly. They sat in her private quarters, a beautifully appointed room filled with artifacts and scrolls. We cultivate the land, but we also listen to its rhythms. There is a balance in all things. Ethan nodded, sipping from a cup of fragrant tea. The beverage, like everything else in Aethoria, was oversized, but he had learned to manage. "It's impressive," he said. "On many worlds I've visited, technological advancement often comes at the cost of the natural environment. You've found a way to thrive without destroying your home." Zara's eyes sparkled with pride. "It is the way of the Aethorians. We believe that true strength comes from working with nature, not against it." As the weeks passed, Ethan found himself growing increasingly comfortable in this world of giants. The initial fear and awkwardness faded, replaced by genuine connections and friendships. The Aethorian children, in particular, had taken a shine to him. They delighted in giving him rides on their shoulders, or competing to see who could lift him the highest, much to the consternation of their mothers. But it wasn't all cultural exchange and playful antics. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something the Aethorians weren't telling him. He noticed the worried glances exchanged by the elders when they thought he wasn't looking, and there was the unmistakable undercurrent of tension that ran through the village, a sense of urgency that belied their outward calm. One evening, as the twin moons of the planet rose over the treetops, Ethan found Zora standing alone at the edge of the village. Her face was turned upward, bathed in the ethereal light of the moons. For a moment, Ethan was struck anew by her beauty. Not just her physical appearance, but the quiet strength and dignity she radiated. "Zara," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Ethan, come, join me." He moved to stand beside her, craning his neck to meet her gaze. "Is everything all right? You seem preoccupied." Zara was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with an emotion Ethan couldn't quite place. "There is much we have not told you, Ethan. Much that I, have been afraid to share." Ethan's heart quickened. Here, finally, was the key to the mystery that had been nagging at him. "Whatever it is, Zora, you can trust me. I want to help, if I can." She looked down at him, her expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. "I believe you would, Ethan. You have a good heart. But what we need, it is no small thing. It would change your life forever. Tell me," Ethan urged gently. Zara took a deep breath, seeming to steel herself. "Our people are dying, Ethan. Not from disease or war, but from a lack of renewal." She gestured to the village behind them. "You have noticed, have you not, that there are no men among us?" Ethan nodded slowly. It had been one of the first things he'd observed, but he hadn't wanted to pry. "For generations beyond count, our people have reproduced through a sacred ritual," Zora continued. "Once every century, when the moons align in a specific configuration, we are visited by beings of pure energy. These beings would merge with chosen Aethorians, allowing us to conceive the next generation." Ethan's scientific mind raced, trying to process this information. Some kind of symbiotic relationship, or perhaps a form of genetic manipulation. Zara shook her head. "We do not understand the specifics. It has simply been our way for as long as our histories record. But now," her voice trailed off, thick with emotion, "the beings haven't returned," Ethan guessed, the pieces falling into place. Zara nodded, a single tear tracing its way down her cheek. "It has been 3 cycles since the last visitation. Our youngest are approaching adulthood, with no new children to follow them. If something does not change, Ethan, we will be the last of the Aethorians." The weight of her words settled over Ethan like a physical force. He understood now the tension he had sensed, the worried glances and hushed conversations, an entire civilization teetering on the brink of extinction. But there was something else, something in the way Zora looked at him, a mixture of hope and guilt. "Zora," he said slowly, "why are you telling me this now?" She knelt down, bringing her face level with his. Her eyes, luminous in the moonlight, bored into his with an intensity that took his breath away. "Because, Ethan," she said softly, "we believe you may be our last hope. Your arrival, It was like a sign from the universe itself, a new form of life, so different from our own, yet possessing a spirit that resonates with ours. Ethan's mind reeled as the implications of her words sank in. You want me to father the next generation of Aethorians. Zara nodded, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. It is much to ask, I know, and we would never force such a thing upon you. But yes, that is our hope, that your genetic material, combined with ours, might create a new future for our people. Ethan stepped back, overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was proposing. His mind raced with questions. Was it even biologically possible? What would the children be like? And most pressingly, could he take on such a monumental responsibility? I need time to think, he managed to say. Zara nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, this is not a decision to be made lightly. Take all the time you need, Ethan. But know that whatever you choose, you have already brought hope to our people simply by being here. As Ethan walked back to his quarters, a structure the Aethorians had built specially to accommodate his smaller size, his head spun with the implications of Zora's revelation. He had come to care deeply for the Aethorians, to admire their culture and way of life. The thought of their civilization fading away filled him with sadness. But to become the progenitor of an entire species, to reshape the future of this world with his very DNA, it was a responsibility almost too vast to comprehend. As he lay in his oversized bed that night, sleep eluding him, Ethan knew that the choice he made would not only determine the fate of the Aethorians, it would forever alter the course of his own life as well. The tribe's dilemma revealed. The days following Zora's revelation were a whirlwind of emotion and introspection for Ethan. The weight of the Aethorians' request pressed heavily upon him, coloring every interaction and observation with new significance. He found himself studying the villagers more closely, noting the grace with which they moved their massive forms and the intelligent sparkle in their eyes. These were a people worth saving, he thought. But was he truly the one who could do it? Ethan threw himself into research, working closely with the village's healers and scholars to understand the intricacies of Aethorian biology. The differences between their species were vast, but there were also surprising similarities. Both were carbon-based life forms with DNA as the blueprint for life. It was theoretically possible, the healers believed, for human and Aethorian genetic material to combine. But the process would not be without risk, Naya, the chief healer, explained. Her weathered face was creased with concern as she showed Ethan the ancient scrolls detailing their reproductive cycle. Our bodies are not designed for live birth. The energy beings that once visited us would initiate a process more akin to what you might call parthenogenesis. Ethan nodded, his scientific curiosity piqued despite the gravity of the situation. Asexual reproduction, where an unfertilized egg develops into a new individual. Precisely, Naya said, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. The energy beings would stimulate this process, guiding the development of the embryo. Without their influence, we fear that any attempt at reproduction could be dangerous for both mother and child. The implications were staggering. Not only was Ethan being asked to father an entire generation, but the process itself could put the Aethorian women at risk. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. As the days passed, Ethan noticed a change in the way the villagers interacted with him. There was a new undercurrent of hope in their gazes, a tentative excitement in their voices when they spoke to him. He realized that word of their plan must have spread throughout the community. The thought both warmed and terrified him. What if he couldn't live up to their expectations? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant purples and golds, Ethan found himself wandering to the village's central gathering place. A group of younger Aethorians had assembled there, engaged in what appeared to be a traditional dance. Their movements were graceful despite their size, bodies swaying in perfect synchronization to the beat of drums. As Ethan watched, mesmerized by the display, he felt a presence beside him. He looked up to see Lyra, one of the younger council members, her silver hair gleaming in the fading light. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, her eyes fixed on the dancers. Ethan nodded. "I've never seen anything like it. The way they move. It's almost like they're lighter than air." Lyra smiled, a touch of sadness in her expression. "This dance tells the story of our people's creation, of how the energy beings came from the stars and breathed life into the first Aethorians." She paused, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I fear it may be one of the last times it is performed." The weight of her words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He had been so focused on the scientific and personal implications of the Aethorians' request that he had almost lost sight of the cultural impact. This wasn't just about biology or genetics. It was about preserving an entire way of life. "Lyra," he said hesitantly, "can I ask you something? Something personal?" She turned to him, her luminous eyes curious. "Of course, Ethan. What is it?" He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "How do you feel about what Zara and the Council are proposing? About me potentially fathering the next generation?" Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the dancers. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "It is complex. On one hand, the thought of mixing our bloodlines with an outsider, even one as kind and intelligent as you, is somewhat frightening. We have always been as we are, unchanging for countless generations." Ethan nodded, understanding the hesitation. "But," Lyra continued, "the alternative is far more terrifying. To watch our people slowly fade away, our culture and traditions lost to time." She shook her head, her expression resolute. "If there is even a chance that you could help us survive, to continue our legacy in some form, then I believe it is worth any price." Her words resonated deeply with Ethan. He had seen firsthand the beauty and wisdom of Aethorian culture. The thought of it disappearing from the universe seemed like an unimaginable loss. As the dance concluded, the participants moved to the center of the gathering place. To Ethan's surprise, they began to sing, a haunting, melodic sound that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. The song spoke of hope and renewal, of life springing forth from the ashes of despair. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat as he listened. In that moment, he understood that his decision would impact far more than just himself or even the current generation of Aethorians. It would determine the fate of an entire civilization. Its art, its music, its stories and traditions. As the final notes of the song faded away, Ethan turned to Lyra. "Thank you," he said softly, "for sharing this with me, for helping me understand what's truly at stake." Lyra placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly delicate for one so large. "Whatever you decide, Ethan, know that you have already brought hope to our people. Your presence here, your willingness to learn and understand. It has reminded us that the universe is vast and full of wonders. That alone is a precious gift." As Ethan made his way back to his quarters that night, his mind was awhirl with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The enormity of the decision before him was daunting, to say the least. But for the first time since Zora had revealed the truth, he felt a sense of clarity beginning to form. He realized that this wasn't just about saving a species from extinction. It was about preserving the unique and beautiful culture, about ensuring that the wisdom and artistry of the Aethorians would continue to enrich the universe for generations to come. As he drifted off to sleep, the haunting melody of the Aethorian song echoed in his mind. And in his dreams, he saw a future where the village was once again filled with the laughter of children, children who carried within them the best of both human and Aethorian heritage. Internal conflict and decision. The following weeks were a tumultuous time for Ethan as he grappled with the monumental decision before him. He threw himself into learning everything he could about Aethorian biology, culture, and history, hoping that knowledge would provide clarity. But with each new piece of information, the complexity of the situation only seemed to grow. One morning, as he sat in the village's vast library poring over ancient texts, he felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Zara standing there, her expression a mixture of concern and affection. "You have been spending much time here," she said softly, settling herself beside him with a grace that belied her size. Ethan nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I feel like the more I learn, the less I know," he admitted. "The implications of what you're asking, they're staggering, Zara." She reached out, gently closing the book he had been studying. "Perhaps it is time to step away from the texts, Ethan. Come, walk with me. There is something I wish to show you." Curious, Ethan followed Zara out of the library and through the village. They passed by the communal gardens where Aethorians tended to enormous alien fruits and vegetables. Children played in the central square, their laughter echoing off the towering structures. Everywhere he looked, Ethan saw signs of a thriving, vibrant community. Zara led him to the outskirts of the village, where the carefully tended gardens gave way to the wild beauty of the alien forest. They walked in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant calls of strange birds. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing. Ethan gasped at the sight before him. In the center of the clearing stood an enormous tree, its bark a shimmering silver that seemed to glow in the dappled sunlight. Its branches reached towards the sky, adorned with leaves that sparkled like diamonds. "This is the heart tree," Zara explained, her voice filled with reverence. "It is said to have grown from a seed planted by the first Aethorians, nurtured by the energy of the beings that gave us life." Ethan approached the tree, marveling at its beauty. As he drew closer, he felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the air around the tree was charged with some form of energy. "It's incredible," he breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." Zara nodded, a sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It is the spiritual center of our people, Ethan. For generations, Aethorians have come here to connect with our ancestors, to seek guidance in times of trouble." She paused, her eyes. "Internal conflict and decision." Zara nodded, a sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It is the spiritual center of our people, Ethan. For generations, Aethorians have come here to connect with our ancestors, to seek guidance in times of trouble." She paused, her eyes filling with a deep sorrow. "But in recent years, the heart tree has begun to fade. Its leaves are less vibrant, its energy diminished. We fear it is a reflection of our people's decline." Ethan placed a hand on the tree's trunk, feeling a faint vibration beneath his palm. He closed his eyes, trying to imagine the generations of Aethorians who had stood in this very spot, seeking wisdom and connection. "Why did you bring me here, Zara?" he asked softly, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. She knelt down, bringing herself closer to his level. "Because I wanted you to understand, truly understand, what is at stake. This tree, like our people, is unique in all the universe. If we fade away, if the heart tree dies, something irreplaceable will be lost." The weight of her words settled over Ethan like a physical force. He thought of all he had learned about the Aethorians, their profound connection to nature, their rich cultural traditions, their wisdom and kindness. The thought of all of that disappearing from the universe filled him with an immense sadness. "I understand," he said quietly. "But Zara, even if I agree to help, there's no guarantee it will work. The biological differences between our species are vast, and even if we can overcome that, who's to say the children will inherit the best of both worlds? What if, in trying to save your people, we end up changing them beyond recognition?" Zara was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the heart tree. When she spoke, her voice was filled with a quiet determination. "Change is inevitable, Ethan. All things must evolve or perish. Perhaps this is the universe's way of guiding our evolution. What matters is not that we remain exactly as we have always been, but that we continue. That the spirit of our people, our connection to this world, and to each other, lives on." Her words resonated deeply with Ethan. As a scientist, he understood the importance of adaptation, of embracing change rather than fearing it. And yet, the enormity of what he was being asked to do still overwhelmed him. "I need more time," he said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly." Zara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need, Ethan. But know this, whatever you decide, you have already brought hope to our people. Your presence here, your willingness to understand and help us, has been a gift beyond measure." As they walked back to the village, Ethan's mind raced with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The fate of an entire civilization rested on his shoulders. It was a responsibility he had never asked for, never imagined he would face. Over the next few days, Ethan sought counsel from various members of the Aethorian community. He spoke with the village elders, gaining insight into their long history and the challenges they had overcome. He spent time with the children, marveling at their joy and curiosity, seeing in them the potential for a bright future. But it was a conversation with Naya, the chief healer, that finally brought clarity to his tumultuous thoughts. "Ethan," she said, her weathered face creased with wisdom, "in all my years, I have learned one truth above all others. Life finds a way. It adapts, it evolves, it perseveres. If there is even a chance that your genetic material could help our people survive, is it not worth taking that chance?" As Ethan looked into Naya's eyes, he saw reflected there the hopes and fears of an entire people. He thought of the heart tree, its energy fading along with the Aethorians. He thought of the children playing in the village square, blissfully unaware of the existential threat facing their people. And in that moment, Ethan made his decision. He found Zora in her private chambers, poring over ancient texts. She looked up as he entered, hope and trepidation warring in her expression. "I'll do it," Ethan said simply. "I don't know if it will work, or what the consequences will be. But I can't stand by and watch your people fade away, not when there's a chance I can help." Zara's eyes filled with tears of joy and relief. She reached out, gently cradling Ethan's face in her enormous hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have given us hope, Ethan. Whatever comes next, we will face it together." As Ethan looked up at Zora, he felt a mix of emotions, fear, excitement, and a deep sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he was about to embark on the most important journey of his life. The fate of the Aethorians, and perhaps the course of evolution itself, was about to change forever. A new beginning. The days that followed Ethan's decision were a flurry of activity. The entire village seemed to come alive with renewed hope and purpose. Preparations began in earnest, with the healers and scientists working tirelessly to develop a procedure that would allow for the combination of human and Aethorian genetic material. Ethan found himself at the center of it all, undergoing countless tests and examinations. The Aethorian healers marveled at his biology, so different from their own yet compatible in ways they had never imagined. As they worked, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the magnitude of what they were attempting. "It's remarkable," Naya said one day, as she reviewed the results of their latest experiments. "Your DNA, when combined with ours, seems to create entirely new possibilities. It's as if the very building blocks of life are being rearranged." Ethan nodded. His scientific curiosity piqued despite the gravity of the situation. "It's like we're writing a new chapter in the book of evolution," he mused. "I just hope it's a chapter with a happy ending." As the day of the procedure approached, Ethan found himself spending more time with Zora. They would often walk together in the evenings, discussing their hopes and fears for the future. Ethan was surprised to find that his feelings for the Aethorian leader had deepened into something more than friendship. There was a connection between them that transcended their physical differences. "Are you afraid?" Zora asked him one night, as they stood beneath the twin moons of the planet. Ethan considered the question carefully. "Yes," he admitted, "but not for myself. I'm afraid of letting your people down, of not being able to give you the future you deserve." Zora reached out, gently taking his hand in hers. "Whatever happens, Ethan, you have already given us more than we could have hoped for. You've given us a chance." The night before the procedure, The entire village gathered for a ceremony at the heart tree. Ethan stood beside Zara, feeling small yet incredibly significant as the Aethorians raised their voices in a song of hope and renewal. As the melody washed over him, Ethan felt a strange sensation, a warmth that seemed to emanate from the tree itself, pulsing in time with the music. "Do you feel it?" Zara whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. For the first time, he truly understood the deep connection the Aethorians had with their world. It was as if the planet itself was acknowledging their efforts, offering its blessing for the path ahead. The next morning, Ethan found himself in the healing center, surrounded by the most skilled Aethorian healers. The procedure itself was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a combination of advanced technology and what could only be described as ritual magic. As the process began, Ethan felt a strange tingling sensation coursing through his body, as if every cell was being infused with a new kind of energy. Hours passed in a dreamlike haze. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of the healers working around him, but unable to focus on any one sensation. At times, he thought he could hear voices, ancient, wise voices speaking in a language he didn't understand but somehow comprehended on a deeper level. When Ethan finally regained full awareness, he found Zara sitting beside him, her face a mask of concern and hope. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Ethan took a moment to assess himself. He felt different, not in any physical way he could pinpoint, but as if something fundamental had shifted within him. "I feel connected," he said finally, "like I'm part of something bigger than myself." Zara's face broke into a radiant smile. "The procedure was successful," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Your genetic material has been successfully combined with ours. Now, we wait." The waiting, as it turned out, was the hardest part. Days turned into weeks as the entire village held its collective breath, waiting for signs that the procedure had worked. Ethan found himself the object of intense curiosity and gratitude, with Aethorians constantly approaching him to express their thanks and share their hopes for the future. It was nearly a month later when the first signs appeared. Nea burst into Ethan's quarters, her face alight with joy. "It's happening," she exclaimed. "The first embryos have begun to develop." The news spread through the village like wildfire. Celebrations erupted spontaneously, with singing and dancing lasting long into the night. Ethan watched it all with a sense of wonder and trepidation. He had done it. He had given the Aethorians a chance at a future. But what would that future look like? As the months passed, the changes became more apparent. The developing embryos, nurtured in specially designed incubation chambers, showed characteristics of both human and Aethorian DNA. They were smaller than pure Aethorian offspring would have been, but still far larger than human babies. Their features were a unique blend, with the striking beauty of the Aethorians tempered by human proportions. But it wasn't just the new generation that was changing. The entire village seemed to be undergoing a transformation. The heart tree, which had been fading, now pulsed with renewed energy. The very air seemed charged with possibility. As the due date for the first births approached, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had come to this world as a lost and lonely survivor, and now he stood on the brink of becoming the progenitor of a new species. The night before the first children were to be born, Ethan and Zara stood together beneath the heart tree. Its leaves shimmered with an inner light, more vibrant than Ethan had ever seen them. "Are you ready?" Zara asked, her hand entwined with his. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the tree pulsing around them. "I don't know if anyone can ever be truly ready for something like this," he admitted, "but I'm glad I'm here, with you, to see it through." Zara smiled, leaning down to place a gentle kiss on his forehead. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. You have given us a future, Ethan. Now let us step into that future with hope and courage." As the twin moons rose over the alien landscape, Ethan and Zara walked hand in hand back to the village. Tomorrow would bring a new dawn, not just for the Aethorians, but for the entire universe. A new species would take its first breath, bridging the gap between two worlds and opening up possibilities beyond imagination. Ethan didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what joys and sorrows the future might hold. But as he looked up at Zora, saw the love and gratitude shining in her eyes, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Together, they would write a new chapter in the story of life itself. A story of hope, of courage, and of the boundless potential of the human spirit.